So, in the second part of my character creation overview, I went over generally what special stats you should be running. So, in this one, I'm going to go over like build considerations. So, there's a few perks that you'll get or that you might want to run that will drastically change the way you play the game. In my Lone Wander video, should you run Lone Wander, I kind of talked about how when you run Lone Wander, it's pretty much you either use this and dog meat, or you run something like, what is it, inspirational with another follower. The reason you'd run inspirational is because you won't damage that ally and they can't damage you, and they can carry more. And you have to consider that having another follower is extremely powerful. Like Dogmeat, while he is good and he offers you some utility and some extra damage, the big downside of Dogmeat is in a lot of like firefights, he's just kind of hanging out with you, not doing anything. So unless there's like melee enemies rushing you, he's generally going to be near you. If you have like any humanoid with you, they can shoot. They can, you can give them a sniper rifle. You can give them a few weapons and actually cycle through them and use them like circumstantially. You can give them like rocket launchers. So having like a Gauss rifle on your side or a rocket launcher on your side is a huge thing to consider, especially if you're going to mod the hell out of this game and make it really hard like I did for this playthrough. So the main things to build around, there's actually quite a few. Some of them are kind of like high up. So I guess we'll start off with this consideration. Are you running VATS or are you not running VATS? Because if you're running VATS, perception is extremely good. Specifically with guns. If you're running a melee VATS build, you don't really need perception because it doesn't really help you in a meaningful way, but perception is really good with VATS gun builds. On the other end of things, agility is really good with VATS melee builds, with sneak builds, and with general melee builds. Strength is good with any melee build, and it also increases your carry weights, which means you can carry more shit and sell more stuff, make more caps. It's especially good on survival mode where everything has weight, especially ammo. So strength can be useful in that situation. But here are some of the key perks you will generally build around. The first one is Lone Wanderer, which requires 3 charisma. And this is one that you usually decide in advance of playing the game. You figure, okay, do I want Dogmeat or do I want a follower? That's the first thing. So if you want to just kind of either go without Dogmeat or with Dogmeat or with the follower, that'll be the first thing you have to determine. The second one, this is a huge one too, is do you need intelligence? So intelligence scales your XP rate and also unlocks some very useful perks. Gun Nut, Hacker, Scrapper I've never really run, but Science is pretty useful, especially if you're going to be running guns, which most builds run guns, so Science usually is useful. Chemist is okay. Robotics Expert is kind of interesting. Nuclear Physicist is really good for a power armor build, so if you want to run a power armor build, you're going to want to eventually get 9 intelligence, because if you read what it does, fusion cores last longer. Radiation weapons do double damage. Fusion cores last an extra 50%. And then you can eject your fusion core and detonate it like a nuke. Also note that Nuclear Physicist does increase fusion core duration or ammo of the laser Gatlin, which uses fusion cores as ammo. So if you're running a laser Gatlin build, you would actually probably want high intelligence and want to spec into 9 intelligence. Nerd Rage is, in my opinion, bad, because if you're playing survival and you're at 20% health and you want to start going nuts and killing things, the small increase in damage resistance and the damage increase doesn't justify peaking and getting headshot or hit with some stray bullets and dying. So I don't even think Nerd Rage is even viable. The only situation it could be is if you reverted back into sneak mode and broke line of sight and got into caution and then were able to get sneak attacks off, but that's way too circumstantial. But Nuclear Physicist is totally legit if you plan on running either power armor or laser Gatlin, as it makes both of them much better. So if you plan on running power armor, you're going to probably want to get 9 intelligence. If you are running Blitz and you want to run a melee build, even if you don't want to use VATS, I highly recommend just getting Blitz just to getting 2 enemies, because Blitz lets you cover a ton of ground quickly. So even if you plan on being a real-time melee like build, Blitz is still good, even just to like getting to a group of enemies. So that's another thing. So in this case, I am running a Blitz build. So in this case, I did need 9 agility to start. So, you know, Nuclear Physicist for power armor build and for Laser Gatlin build. Laser Gatlin is literally one of the best weapons in the game with no mods. With mods, you can kind of like get some balancing things, but even, you know, vanilla game, like one of the best weapons in the game, really good to run. Blitz, extremely good with all melee builds, really good with melee sneak builds. This is something you should generally make a build around if you're going to be running melee. Even if you don't want to be using VATS all the time with a melee build, like if you want to use it in real time, you still should run Blitz. Like, it's just so fucking strong. You should run it. Another thing to consider is Grim Reaper Sprints. For any VATS build, I highly recommend getting High Luck. 1, you get crits faster. 2, you can get things like Crit Banker and better criticals, both of which are very fucking strong. Grim Reaper's Sprint is insane. You just, you know, even right now I have a 15% chance. Once it gets to 25%, a fourth of your kills just reset all of your action points. Combined with Blitz, you can just be blitzing around and just like killing enemies. And, you know, if you get Crit Banker, you can just have like 5 crits stored. If you get Ninja, you can be like ninja critting dudes in sneak mode and blitzing to them, and it just like all adds up. But Grim Reaper's Sprint is another thing. If you're running any VATS build, is always good to run. Another consideration for a gun build is Gun Fu. This only affects guns, even though the description sounds like it affects physical, like melee weapons. This is very good with gun VATS builds, especially ones like if you are able to kill, you know, 1 or 2 enemies in a row, you can just keep scaling your damage. So this is actually quite strong. So with a VATS build, this is probably one of, like, look at this, you 50% more damage to your 3rd target and beyond, 25% to your 2nd. In VATS, you instantly crit your 4th target and beyond. This is insane. Like, Gun Fu is absolutely nuts. Like, with the VATS build. So these are some big considerations for endgame builds. You have Grim Reaper Sprint, Blitz, Gun Fu, Nuclear Physicist. Moving over to the perception side, Penetrator is quite good. This just lets you straight up be like a wall hacking aimbot. Like, you can just shoot dudes that are behind things. Like, this is crazy. If you're running a gun VATS build, you're going to need perception. You're going to want to get 9 perception for Penetrator. This is crazy. The 2nd rank, there is no decrease in accuracy. You can just straight up headshot dudes behind cover. This is absolutely nuts. So this is quite crazy. This is definitely really strong. Concentrated fire is good too if you're using like a DPS weapon. So you can see here, you get accuracy and damage scaling. So this is also something you would build around for a VATS build. Perception specifically is only good for VATS builds, or if you want to scale explosive damage, then you would want Perception 5. But the main takeaway for Perception are Penetrator and Concentrated Fire. You can always start off with 9 Perception and then just level up into 10, you know, put a point in Perception, or even just get the Perception bobblehead in the beginning of the game, start out at 9, then get Concentrated Fire and Penetrator early on. But these are something you'd build around. Rooted isn't necessarily a skill you build around, but it's something melee builds always want. Extra damage resistance while attacking and extra scaled damage when you're not moving is great because it auto-procs in VATS attacks. Because when you attack with VATS with melee, it automatically makes you standing still, so you get the damage scaling. So that's always good. Also, while standing still, you gain plus 25 damage resistance. So even if you're just standing still in general and something hits you, you just take less damage. So that's also useful. So you can be standing still shooting at something and you just take less damage. So that's pretty nice. But this isn't something you would build around. Pain Train, however, is. So just like with Nuclear Physicist, if you're running a power armor build, Pain Train is it. Like, sprinting into enemies hurts and staggers them. Power armor now causes severe damage and a more powerful stagger, so it even has an even greater stagger. Power armor now causes massive damage and knocks enemies down. Impact landing near enemies inflicts even more damage. So if you jump off a high tower or like even like a story or 2 up and land near enemies, they will take AoE damage when you're wearing power armor, and you have no fall damage ever wearing power armor. This scales the damage. So You can, and also, if you have a jetpack, this is where this gets really fucking crazy. And this is why I don't use power armor. Even though it's cool, it's really cool you can do this. And I totally get why you would want a jetpack and just land on people like a fucking meteor and just blow them up. Like, that's awesome. But it's too broken for me, so I want like a visceral challenge. But Pain Train is a thing you build around, 100%. If you want to run a power armor build, you want 10 strength. For sure. Pain Train is so good. Especially if you combine it with like Blitz or something. Like if you were using power armor with like a Blitz build, and you just like blitzed into a dude and then just started sprinting through all the enemies to knock them over. Like you could just clean them up with whatever weapon you want. Like it'd be crazy. But Pain Train is very good. And especially if you get a jetpack, you can just land on people and kill them. So yeah, this is definitely a thing to consider building around. Solar powered, not so much. Intimidation, I wouldn't. I mean, unless you want to make a meme playthrough where you just pacify people and then eventually have them fight for you. I wouldn't build around very many charisma things. The most I would invest into charisma is 6 for local leader. Charisma isn't bad though, but it doesn't really change the way you play in a substantial way. For most other things, like if you want to run big guns, heavy gunner is good, so you want to at least have 5 strength. But there is a big downside to heavy gunner. You only really get heavy guns, like I want to say once you hit like level 10, it's kind of hard to get them. You start the game off with a minigun, but you can't buy ammo for it for a while. And its ammo's expensive and the damage just isn't there. But once you get like RP, like the rocket launcher, like that's when it starts to be insane. And then there's other like things like the Fat Man, but that's very expensive to run. So the rest of like the middle tier stuff, some of it can change the way you play the game. So Idiot Savant, this is another huge consideration. If you need intelligence, then you don't want to run Idiot Savant. You still can. You still will, on average, increase your XP. So if you have 10 intelligence and you run Idiot Savant, it just won't proc as often, but it will still proc. So you will still, on average, increase your XP gain. So you're better off always having it, but it's not critical if you're high intelligence. But it's something you can run. Better criticals is good. Crit builds require luck, so if you're running Grim Reaper Sprint, which you probably are if you're running any kind of VATS build, because all crits are in VATS by default, then you'll already be able to spec into these, so that shouldn't be an issue. Mysterious Stranger is okay, it's not like something you'd spec into, but the main things you would spec into are like Pain Train for power armor build, Concentrated Fire and Penetrator for general VATS gun builds, so that's in Perception. Nuclear Physicist for power armor builds, or eventually Gatling Laser. And the nice thing about if you're running a Gatling Laser build, you don't need to get this right away. You can get it like in the mid game, because you won't even get a Gatling Laser until you're like level 15 plus. So you don't have to even run this right away. But if you're running power armor, you probably want to get it just to save money, because what it'll do, your fusion cores will last longer. It'll make you more efficient. It's just good. And then, of course, detonating your fusion cores, like say your fusion core is about to run out, you can just turn it into an insane weapon. That's quite good, so you can't go wrong there. Blitz is definitely something you build around. Gunfu is definitely something you build around. Grim Reaper Sprint is definitely something you build around. In this case, I invested in high luck and agility early, so I was able to get both of these. And as you can see, I'm like slowly pushing my strength up, and I just started investing in endurance because I had one. I die constantly, so I'm just starting to push this up. But Lone Wanderer is definitely something you build around if you don't want to run a companion. Idiot Savant is something you make a build around if you do not need intelligence. For melee builds, you generally don't need intelligence. The most I would spec into for a melee build is possibly medic, but I almost never run this. You can always use food, and 40% of your lost health isn't bad. Eating a bunch of different types of food actually scales your HP recovery rate, so this isn't even optimal. Like, you're actually always better off just having a bunch of different types of food for survival mode so that you can recover health faster. But yeah, Idiot Savant is definitely something that usually melee builds run. Most gun builds need at least Gun Nut, which puts you at 3 intelligence, which does reduce the proc rate of Idiot Savant, so just something to consider. For the rest of the perks, I would say the rest of them don't really impact the game in a huge enough way. Pretty much all of the ones I mentioned do. Most of them are endgame or high into the skill tree. So Nerd Rage, I highly recommend never running. Even circumstantially, like you generally will die if you're really low and like if you want to go on some huge killing spree with like the small damage increase you get from Nerd Rage, you're very likely just gonna end up dying. Because if you're at low health and you know, make yourself visible to enemy AI with hit scan weapons, they're probably just going to kill you. So I don't even think Nerd Rage is very good. But Blitz is, Gun Fu is, Grim Reaper Sprint is, Concentrated Fire, Penetrator, Pain Train. Inspirational isn't something you build around, it's just something you would probably pick up. Same thing with Solar Powered. Solar Powered is great because it can heal away your radiation damage, but it takes you until level 27 before you get that effect. Otherwise, it's just like some strength and endurance during daytime. And then eventually it starts healing you at level 50, but level 27 to heal away your radiation is quite good, but this is mid-game, so you don't build around this right away. Ninja is something you can build around, speccing into both Ninja and Sneak, but this is more of something that you can spec into whenever. It's not like essential. You can't... Whoops. Accidentally hit start there. You can't hit too high of damage too quick. Like the highest you can get is like a slight increase. And then eventually you end up getting 10x melee damage, which is quite good, especially with a Blitz build. So Ninja can be quite strong, but it takes some time before it really picks up. But yeah, those are the main perks you're probably going to make builds around. All the other perks, there's really nothing too stand out. They are good. I'm not saying they're bad perks, but when you're making a build, usually it has something to do with like any of those mentioned perks. Obviously, for damage scaling perks, you just get these when you can. You get your essential perks for your class as soon as possible, and then you start scaling. So like right now, you can see I have Big Leagues 2, and then I'm waiting to hit level 15 before I can get Big Leagues 3. But if I could get Lone Wanderer before that, it's at level 17, so I'm going to have to wait for that. But you always want to pick what's optimal and what you need. So like right now, I really badly need Endurance, and my damage is mostly fine. So I'll probably hold off on getting Big Leagues and instead go for Endurance. But yeah, that's my overview for character building part 3. Considerations for what perks a general build invests in and what kind of perks you would invest in. So it kind of goes into, you know, your base stats, which unlocks your perks, and what perks are generally good to build around. So if you're running Power Armor, you want Nuclear Physicist, which requires 9 Intelligence, and Pain Train, which requires 10 Strength. If you're a Gun VATS build, specifically, because Penetrator doesn't do anything for a Blitz build, if you can target an enemy with VATS, and you're running Blitz and they're behind cover, if there is a physical path to them and they're not on like something you need to jump up physically, like if there's like a ramp up to where they are that's kind of close, you will be able to attack them and it'll teleport you to them. So Penetrator doesn't do anything for melee attacks. So aside from that, you have Concentrated Fire, which is also gun related. And then of course you have your Lone Wanderer build, which is very standard. A lot of people like to run this. Nuclear Physicist can also be used in the mid to late game to increase efficiency on Laser Gatlin, but aside from that, you don't really take this unless you're running either one of those, because not too much uses fusion cores, just that weapon and power armor for the most part. Blitz for melee builds, gun for melee builds in general, and especially VATS builds. Gun Fu for gun-based VATS builds. Grim Reaper Sprint for any VATS build. It's useless out of VATS. Luck generally isn't that good out of VATS. It doesn't really bring too much to the table. Luck out of VATS, your best bet is just Idiot Savant if you're running like a real-time melee build, but melee builds greatly benefit from luck and agility-based perks in VATS, so you're usually better off running that. But those are the main considerations, the big league perks, we'll call them, that you should be looking at when making a build. The rest of the perks, like Life Giver, Toughness, your damage scaling, and like armor, things like that, you should just get them as needed. Like let's say getting armor would greatly increase your tankiness by unlocking, you know, some mods for metal armor or something. I would get it then. because that could be more value than toughness. That could get you like an extra like 50 armor or something. But yeah, so you want to build around those depending on what you're running. Mr. Sandman's like a silencer type build, but you know, I consider this just another damage scaling thing. So yeah, that's all I would say about that. And you can just kind of invest in other perks as needed. I generally don't run things like pickpockets or locksmith or hacker, because most of the locks, like the loot you get from locks, is just random crap you could just get from a chest for free. So I don't see the value in it, and I've even just used console commands to unlock a thing just to see what was in it, and it often is like not very appealing, kind of just like reinforcing that it's not worth it. But yeah, that's what I would say you should make your build around. Not that obviously, but like those main perks. Consider if those perks are relevant to your build. You know, playing in real time versus VATS changes a lot. Playing in real time kind of opens you up to take more utility perks, because you don't need all the VATS perks and the high perception, so you can really get away with like, you know, not running Penetrator, not running Concentrated Fire, keeping perception like at 1 or 2. It's always going to be at 2, because in the beginning of the game there is a perception bobblehead right near Preston Garvey, so even if you want to run Rifleman, I would still recommend putting no points in perception at all if you are like playing in real time. So yeah, that's my part 3 of character building. In part 4, I will go over something useful. Still trying to figure it out, to be honest. I think that's most of what I wanted to cover. I think part 4 is going to have some of like the build considerations. Originally, part 3 was just going to be like Lone Wanderer or not, but I kind of went into other key perks. So I think that's probably it for now. I'm going to do a special tier list and rank each stat, like each base attribute and how useful it is on its own. And then I'm going to do a tier list for each skill, like each perk in each thing. So I'll do like the strength perk tier list, perception perk tier list, and so on. So definitely look for those. I might be doing some more Bioshock Infinite like builds that you can run. The big issue with that is like you generally need to run like Possession or Shock Jockey or some kind of hard CC. So like even though you can run certain builds like against certain enemy types, you really need to run specific vigors. But all right, so that's the end of this one. Thanks for checking this out, and I'll see you in the next one.